little bit about what the League of Women Voters has been doing, because we've been involved in environmental issues since the 1920s and 1930s, when League members were studying water. So we've been in this a long time. Thank you. In the 1970s, the League built a broad national program focused on protecting and managing the interrelated aspects of air, water, land use, energy, and waste management. Since then, we've been seeking to preserve and protect life-supporting ecosystems and public health. So some of us have been contacting people who make the laws to make sure the right laws are getting passed, or just to give them a push to enforce it. And so we've been involved in this from the 1920s until now, and still busy working on it. And now we have the next generation is going to be talking to you, and their Professor A.J. Schneller will introduce them.
Okay.
Thanks for inviting us, Louise. We're excited to be here. And I really appreciate your emphasis on environmental protection. It means a lot, especially in this day and age. So my name is Dr. A.J. Schneller. I work at Skidmore College in the Environmental Studies and Sciences program. And I was going to present my research on bomb trains and crude oil transportation via railways through Saratoga County. What I'd like to do is be really democratic and concede all of my time. Well, potentially I'm going to present if Stephen Schaefer doesn't show up. He's stuck in traffic in Albany, at which time I will present. But I would like to give my capstone senior environmental studies students the opportunity to present their research on the proposed Pilgrim Pipeline in the Hudson River Valley. And they've been conducting this research for the past year and have gathered over 150 hours of interview data from community influentials, elected officials such as Paul Tonko, nonprofit organizations such as Sustainable Saratoga, who's here in the audience today. And I think it's just really good to give them the opportunity to present this cutting edge research that they've even, did you guys collect data last week? Yeah, this is really relevant stuff that's happening. And then when they're done presenting, they would happily take your questions, and also they would love some feedback on their presentation, because they are going to present this to 200 individuals, including faculty members at Skidmore College on Wednesday. And so this is a real dry run for them, but if something doesn't make sense, or if something is unclear, if they haven't explained something well, they would love your feedback before the rubber hits the road on Wednesday, so to speak. Something else could hit the fan, but right now, we're just gonna talk about rubbers and roads. Okay, so this is Christina and Sarah and Bella, and I'm gonna let them take it away.
And I'm Christina Batiste, and as AJ stated, we're environmental studies students conducting community-based research and on citizen and city government engagement with the proposed Pilgrim Pipeline. So during this presentation, we will share our overall findings with you. However, if anyone is interested to hear more details about our research, feel free to speak with us after this presentation. So to begin, the United States has the largest network of energy pipelines in the world, with a system of over 2.4 million miles of underground pipelines. That's enough pipe to encircle the Earth 96 times. Now, currently, there is oil, particularly crude oil, going through this part of New York State. However, it's not coming through pipelines, it's coming by rail from the Bakken Shale Formation located in North Dakota and Canada, which you might be familiar with because it is also the formation that would supply the Dakota Access Pipeline if it were to be approved. So the Bakken Formation is estimated to contain about 7.4 billion barrels of crude oil, and North Dakota produces 12% of U.S. crude oil overall. So this oil is being extracted through the process of hydraulic fracturing, transported by rail up through Canada and then coming down through New York State, as well as coming across the U.S. into western New York and then into the Port of Albany also. So once it reaches the Port of Albany, it either continues by rail to a refinery in Linden, New Jersey, or by barge across the Hudson River, and then up to the St. John refinery in Canada. Right, so what are these cars that are transporting the crude oil? They're called DOT 111s, and although they've been made specifically for the transport of this crude oil, there remain safety concerns when carrying the Bakken crude. So the Bakken crude is flammable and volatile because of chemicals associated with fracking, the presence of propane and ethane, and also increased pressure. So while many of these chemicals are undisclosed, hydrochloric acid associated with fracking processes is suspected of deteriorating the already thin-walled DOT 111s, making them more likely to tear and explode should a train derail. And so this has already occurred in places like Lac Mégantic, Quebec in 2013.
It's all going to be memorized by
Yeah, I didn't practice with a mic. So this was where a train carrying crude oil from the Bakken Shale in North Dakota had 63 cars derail and spill about 40,000 barrels of crude oil. So the U.S. has made commitments to phase out these cars by 2025. However, this still allows for 8 years of increasing potential for derailments and explosions, and since this disaster, 5 more derailment accidents have occurred in Canada and the U.S. So Pilgrim Pipeline Holdings, LLC, is a company that was created specifically for the creation of the Pilgrim Pipeline, and they propose that pipelines are actually safer and the best way to go about transporting this crude oil. So the proposed Pilgrim Pipeline would stretch 178 miles from Albany to Linden, New Jersey, running along the New York State Thruway and the Hudson River. So Pilgrim Pipeline claims that the Northeast is one of the last remaining regions without a pipeline in place. So again, they argue that pipelines are the safest way to transport the crude oil and refined liquids, and strongly imply that building the pipeline would remove any need for trains or barges. However, the proposed pipeline would still require the input of crude oil from the Bakken Shale to come by train into Albany, which, if anything, would actually increase the number of trains going through New York State. Okay, so additionally, even though pipelines are less likely to explode than trains, they still spill on average 3 times as much oil as trains when they do spill. So crude oil pipelines have spilled in places like Refugio State Beach, California, when in 2015 a corroded pipe burst, spilling 3,400 barrels of oil. The pipe was 28 years old, and it had been inspected on numerous occasions and repaired at least 3 times before the spill occurred, but as you can see, unfortunately, the spill still happened even with those precautions. And in fact, spills like this happen all the time. Just last month, the Keystone Pipeline spilled over 400 barrels of oil and had to be temporarily shut down. So given all this information, we were really compelled to understand the perception of risk involving pipelines.
So we wanted to research whether stakeholders were concerned with the associated risks of the Pilgrim Pipeline and also the increase in crude by rail. We also wanted to research if variability existed within counties and cities, and whether these entities were involved in the environmental policy arena. In order to do so, we conducted 14 semi-structured interviews that were then transcribed. We also conducted participant observation when we went to an educational information session in Kingston, New York. And we also used GIS programming in order to produce maps that highlighted potential risks that are associated with the pipeline. The interviews involved elected officials, board members from nonprofit organizations, influential community members, and a representative from Pilgrim Pipeline Holdings.
You want to leave that up there for 1 second?
Sure. Yeah, so these are the 14 people that we interviewed.
Yeah, and it's broken up by column, right? So the first column is elected officials, second column is nonprofits, and then the first two are community influentials, and then the last is the media representative from Pilgrim Pipeline.
So the two major implications that we found were in regards to the environment and the economy. So many of our respondents discussed a fear of polluting our water systems. The pipeline would go through 296 bodies of water and could affect 25 federally listed endangered species. If a pipeline were to leak, it would greatly affect a lot of the water bodies that citizens depend on. As Christina said, the company has stated that the pipeline is one of the safest ways to transport crude oil, and that it would protect our environment from barges and trains. In terms of the economy, the pipeline would bring a lot of construction jobs, which by nature are temporary, but if the pipeline were to leak, it could affect tourism in these communities, and a lot of these communities depend on tourism in order to fund their economies.
So one of the questions that we asked in our 14 semi-structured interviews was, oh, sorry, am I not loud enough?
No.
Also, is this better? One of the questions that we asked in our 14 semi-structured interviews was, what are your top 3 concerns? And we asked our participants or respondents to list them. And what we found was more than half, 18 of our respondents, listed water quality as one of their main concerns. Environmental degradation and pollution was listed by half of our respondents. And then human health and safety, economics, and potential for disaster were listed by more than 1/3 of our respondents. Also, oil reliance, human rights, and public and private lands were of concern. What this kind of told us was that while we have a lot of huge issues, they're also all very much interrelated. And so from that, we were able to extrapolate 7 key themes from our interviews. And these were concerns regarding the environmental impacts of pipelines and associated increases in oil trains, demand to improve existing energy infrastructure instead of investing in new projects, necessity for local and state support of renewable energy, not fossil fuels, necessity for education about fossil fuel infrastructure, activism in response to the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Keystone XL Pipeline, environmental justice concerns, and finally, negative economic impacts. And so I'm going to tell you about the first 3, and then I'm going to pass it on to Sarah and Christina. So in terms of concerns regarding the environmental impacts of pipelines and associated increase in oil trains, respondents expressed serious concerns not only about potential for spills, but also for degradation from the construction of the pipeline and then associated greenhouse gas emissions and resulting water quality and air quality issues. So Assembly Member for the 103rd District of New York State, Kevin Cahill, spoke about this, saying, the water in our community is precious and very, very important, not just for the health and safety of the people who live here, but also for our economy. The more we have to spend to keep water clean, the more threats there are to the purity of water, the lower the quality of life is, and the more at risk our local economy is. That's a picture of him. So in terms of the next theme, which was demand to improve existing energy infrastructure instead of investing in new projects, the currently existing fossil fuel transportation infrastructure in this country is severely understaffed and underregulated. So this system really requires attention before we invest in new projects that will be implemented with clearly flawed regulatory systems. And Jen Metzger, the Roslindale councilwoman, spoke on this when she said, pipelines are never inspected. I shouldn't say never, but the regulatory infrastructure in charge of monitoring the pipeline network is severely understaffed, under-resourced, and is not inspected. So next, the necessity for local and state support of renewable energy on fossil fuels was mentioned quite a bit in our interviews. And our respondents noted that this was mostly in context to the New York State Energy Plan for 2030, which has a goal of a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and states that 50% of the state's electricity must be sourced from renewable energy. So when you think about the Pilgrim Pipeline, the idea of putting a crude pipeline through our state is directly in opposition to these goals. And so we heard from Chris Mathieson, I hope I pronounced that right, our very own Commissioner of Health, who said that obviously there's a need for oil. From my perspective, I would like to see people use less fossil fuels. If everybody does a little bit, it can really cut down on the amount of fossil fuels being used. But we're going to be with fossil fuels for a long time.
Okay, so next, when talking to a number of our interview participants, they commented on how vital the role of education is when facing these types of issues like Pilgrim Pipeline. Nonprofits made it pretty clear that they felt without organizations like them pushing for action on this issue, nothing would have happened. So according to one of our respondents, community influential Mary Ellen Ryle, education is paramount at all levels, in the grade schools, the high schools, the colleges, the administrators, the government. All of them have to be involved in environmental education. I think in our country, we haven't insisted that it should be part of the curriculum, and so we're raising generations of citizens who know nothing about the earth. And one of the reasons the activism on the Pilgrim Pipeline issue has been so successful is because of how activists and nonprofits have been educating the public on this issue. In fact, one of the reasons we have really not found anyone in support of the pipeline is because our respondents have said once they've educated supporters on this issue, they've changed to be in opposition. Additionally, activism in response to the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Keystone XL pipelines at a national scale have inspired many to be involved in the fight against pipelines. During our interview with a representative from Pilgrim Pipeline, he told us that the backlash they've received from Pilgrim Pipeline has been relatively normal since DAPL. And there was a belief among many of our respondents that Pilgrim Pipeline is in a way the Northeast Dakota Access Pipeline, and all of these fights are essentially the same. According to Sue Rosenberg, founder of the Coalition Against the Pilgrim Pipeline for New York, our fight against Pilgrim is in many ways the same fight as not only other pipeline fights, but also as communities impacted by uranium mining or coal ash dumping or by mountaintop removal mining. It's all the same. Communities get impacted and destroyed for the good of the corporation. We really have an opportunity now to change that. And this notion has really created a sense of unity that has helped to make the activism against the pipeline so widespread.
So then the next issue or theme that we found was environmental justice concerns. Unfortunately, marginalized communities often have higher risks associated with environmental hazards. Here you can see a GIS map that we created that shows monthly income in the communities that are along the pipeline in New York State. As you can see, there is a lot of red, orange, and yellow areas on this map, which show very low monthly income levels, the highest being $590 a month. If you wanted to look at this in terms of yearly income, the highest you would find on this map is about $19,000. In Buffalo, New York, we found communities that the highest yearly income level was around $60,000. So that shows that a lot of these counties along the line have relatively low income levels and that the pipeline would disproportionately affect them. So we talked to Jeremy Cheerson from Riverkeeper, and he said that the south end of Albany are low-income minorities bearing the brunt of emissions and noise impacts. Not only would you have increased emissions and air pollution from more trains carrying oil into the port, but Pilgrim has proposed to carry refined products back, so you have potentially increased truck traffic and increased diesel emissions. The last theme that we found was negative economic impacts that could happen from the pipeline. Jen Metzger stated, "The fossil fuel industry does nothing for the local economy, and if there was a spill, it would have devastating effects. The agricultural and tourism sectors would both be adversely affected by any major spill. And as I stated before, a lot of the communities along the pipeline depend on tourism to fund their economies." Here is a second GIS map. In order to create this, we used total trains per month from 2014 and projected oil prices in order to show a map that had 2018 projections of total trains per month if the pipeline were to be constructed. So the width of each line represents the total number of trains per month. As you can see, the western train line has the widest line and would represent 90 trains per month. The northern line would represent 20 trains per month. At full capacity, the pipeline can carry about 200,000 barrels of oil a day. Each train car has about 120 tank cars. So Pilgrim Pipeline would represent about 70 trains per month. And this was when we were using total number of train cars per month from 2014. We have found that most of the trains in this area have all but stopped. So the pipeline would still greatly increase the amount of trains moving per month. And as Dr. Stephen Schaefer said, the Pilgrim Pipeline was telling the public that 200,000 barrels of crude oil go to Albany every day, but they never bothered to look up any data, actual data. They made up this number so they could say, what's the difference if we put this in our nice, clean pipeline?
So, in terms of the current status of the pipeline, in terms of the current status of the pipeline, we have heard, or we've seen that from Pilgrim that they've been essentially silent since July of 2016, both on their website and in the media. So a lot of our respondents have kind of concluded that they've derailed the pipeline through their efforts. A quote from Jim Quigley, the Ulster Town supervisor, kind of sums it up. He said, "Based on our knowledge, we believe that the pipeline is dead, so we're not going to waste any time on it." But what we actually found when we talked to Paul Nathanson from Pilgrim about 2 weeks ago was that as far as he's concerned, the application is still very much underway. And in fact, applications have been submitted for New Jersey, and they're looking into various documentation and studies for New York. So unfortunately, the pipeline is, well, sorry, that's very biased. The pipeline is still very much underway under Paul Nathanson's statement. However, we have seen that the advocacy that we've seen throughout the state up and down the Hudson has certainly slowed this process. So what does all of this mean? First, I'd like to direct your attention to this figure. This is a GIS map. So what you see here are, we're just going to look at New York, we're not going to look at New Jersey down here. All of these green shapes are the municipalities directly on the pipeline route that have passed resolutions of opposition to the pipeline. And then all of the light green shapes, these are kind of yellowish, I guess, are the municipalities that have passed resolutions of, or memorializing resolutions of opposition. So essentially they're not directly on the route of the pipeline, but they're still very much against the pipeline. The gray municipalities are those that have not made a stance on the pipeline. But what you'll notice is that there's actually no municipalities on here that have made a direct stance for the pipeline, which is a great show of the level of activism and the communication between all of these municipalities that we know are predominantly very low income up and down the Hudson. So regardless of level of resource, the people in these municipalities have really shown how much they care about this issue and like made their voices heard. And so I'm gonna come back down here now. So what we thought was really cool from our study was that basically this is a really big show of unification of state and government, elected officials, citizens, and grassroots organizers regardless of political affiliation and beliefs. So we've seen successful teamwork between nonprofits and interest groups, which we might know is kind of hard to do sometimes. And this immense effort has shown the power of education and activism to, at the very least, stall the pipeline. We don't know what will happen when the pipeline goes to the Department of Conservation's evaluations in the future, but regardless, the important takeaway is that hundreds, if not thousands, of people have taken the stance on this issue and made their voices heard, and this is an excellent example of statewide unity, and it could be definitely used as a model for future activism. So we'd like to thank our advisor, AJ Schneller, as well as all of our excellent participants, including Dr. Stephen Schaefer and Bill Baumke from Sustainable Saratoga. And we field any questions you have at this point.
When you said the pipeline would be, the cars would be phased out by 2025, in favor of what?
So there is, I believe, a new,
Yeah, they're gonna make a model with double shell
yes.
wall, because right now there's single shell, and that poses a really big problem for the crude that is being transported. So as far as we know, and what we've heard, it's gonna be double shelled, and that's, I think, the major improvement that they're looking to make.
Thank you.
In terms of that, someday when the train cars are better,
You want to do this over?
I would just like to know if that is the solution, to have better train cars and not have a pipeline, or is there another solution?
Well, in terms of the state's goals, I think the goal is to move towards a much more renewable energy profile. However, being that the current technology doesn't really provide for great storage of, solar or wind-produced electricity, we just don't have the technology yet to make that a possibility. So they're hoping by 2030 to transition to 50% renewable electricity sources, which is a really huge goal, and that makes New York State one of the leaders in, renewable energy and embracing that. So I think that's the eventual goal, but as we've heard from our respondents, it's not necessarily feasible at this moment.
Yeah, so what a lot of our respondents have said is that we should fix the current infrastructure, which is the train cars, make sure there are more inspectors that can look at the train tracks and make sure nothing's going to go wrong, rather than putting in another new pipeline that could have, another issue on the environment and communities.
I'd just like to add what we've heard as well is that, pipeline is, their typical life is about 40 years, so that would be a really big commitment for the state to be shipping crude oil down the Hudson for 40 years, meaning that we're, potentially increasing the longevity and the lifetime of the crude oil use because you have to feed that pipeline for those 40 years. So I think that's really goes against the New York State Energy Plan.
Yeah, without the pipeline, then, I understand that we go back to the current practice, which is basically the oil is transferred to Albany from rail to tankers, right? Which then cruise down the Hudson and bring it to the refineries. How does that compare as an alternative? Is that less desirable or more desirable, or?
Well, most people have said that if you were to just fix the infrastructure that we have now, which is putting it on tankers, that would probably be a better solution, because the pipeline isn't going to get rid of the train cars because they're separate companies, so they're not really working together. So it would just increase the trains that are going through. So, personally, I think, and what we've heard, is that instead of having another company come in, build a pipeline, and then also still have the train cars from other oil companies, to just stick with the ones that we have and fix that infrastructure and make it safer.
Hi, I have two questions related, I guess. The pipeline structure, you went over the rail car structure. I was wondering if there's any research about improvements in pipeline structure and what the old pipelines were in relation to what they are now.
Stephen, you can help out with this if you want.
Schaefer, I'm so sorry I was late with the traffic problems and missed all the best part. But this question, most of the spills from pipelines are due to a combination of human error and numerous environmental factors such as ground movement, fatigue cracks, weld breaks, girth weld breaks, improper welding in the first place, even damage done to the pipe when it's being carried to be laid in the ground can turn up as a leak 15 years later. So the companies will tell you, we'll make ours out of the best steel, whether it's from China or from the America, we don't know. We'll have all our welds perfect, but it never works. At Keystone 1 pipeline had something like 200 small leaks in its first year of operation. No major ones from that, but pipelines leak from a number of problems. And I'll show you some examples on pictures. So fixing the technology with better steel is not going to make the difference.
Furthermore, one of the issues with pipeline technology is that they haven't really figured out how to make great response technology. So when there is a leak, what's it called? The monitoring system doesn't necessarily pick up on it. So that's one of the biggest issues, is that you have these massive spills happening, and they only get found out about because people literally find oil in their yard or in the ocean or whatever's the environment around the pipeline. And so that's why we see so much more oil spilled from pipelines than from contained sources like trains or barges.
The other question I had was, if this pipeline does come to pass, you said there would be more train traffic, right? Does that mean train traffic coming north to south as well?
Yeah, as far as we've studied and heard, it would increase the train traffic on both rail lines that we showed earlier. There's a northern rail line coming from Canada and then a western rail line through the US.
Right.
And because they're different companies, it's not going to really stop another company from using trains. And they do have to use trains to feed the pipeline in Albany.
Right. So is there any activism that you've seen north of Albany and up regarding the possibility of more trains?
Yeah, we had, so we spoke to a couple of people in Saratoga, including Bill Bohm-King from Sustainable Saratoga, who have brought this issue to the town. And Saratoga is actually one of the towns that has passed a memorializing resolution opposed to the pipeline because of the direct impact they would face with the increased train traffic.
I want to thank you for your research. It's very, very convincing, and I'm impressed by it. In addition, I'm impressed by the fact that your research indicates that tank cars are 3 times safer than pipelines. I didn't realize that. But is it your conclusion that we should simply continue to ship the oil from Albany down to the metropolitan New York area primarily by ship tanks, vessels going down the Hudson River, that's the safest alternative that's available to us at this point? Is that the conclusion you reach and the recommendation you would make with regard to the shipment of oil?
That's a great question. It's difficult. We like it. Give us a challenge. So essentially, what our conclusion is that the majority of the people that we spoke to are really hoping that the state will stick to their guns about the 2030 energy plan and move towards a more renewable energy economy and start phasing out these fossil fuels that we know are detrimental to the environment and our own health. And so what we're looking at is sticking with the status quo, improving the infrastructure that we already have, and not bringing in a new long-term pipeline that will bring, increased dangerous trains through the area. Does that answer your question?
If I could just pursue that a little bit, though, but isn't part of that plan based on such things as keeping the nuclear-powered plants in Oswego along Lake Ontario functioning, and isn't there an adverse consequence from doing that? Doesn't everything have a trade-off, I guess, is the point I'm making? And in your analysis, I assume the best trade-off is still the ships taking the oil from Albany down to New York.
From the extent of our study, yes, but you can answer.
Right, yeah, so what we've concluded is, like, as Bella stated, where New York State just isn't ready to eliminate fossil fuels from our infrastructure right now, the energy plan. But as Sarah stated earlier, the number of trains right now going through New York State carrying crude oil has really decreased by quite a bit. This could be due to the decreased price of crude oil. So what we're hoping is that if we don't build this pipeline, that the decreased number of train cars might stop altogether, and then that would really pave the way for more renewable infrastructure rather than having to rely on crude oil.
And there's also the issue that the Pilgrim Pipeline, most likely the oil is going to be exported, and so it doesn't benefit New Yorkers, and so there's no point to have the oil go through New York if we're not going to have an economic benefit or something else, and so it doesn't help the renewable goal that we have now. But I think that what is happening is that people want to stick with nuclear, increase the infrastructure that we have now, make it safer, and hopefully when technology is ready to move in the direction of renewables at like a slow pace that can be sustained.
But that would just shift the transshipment of this fuel to some other state. Is this just a New York State example of not in my backyard?
That's a great question. I know that a lot of other states are fighting pipelines at the moment. There's a natural gas pipeline in Virginia that people are trying to get rid of. I think that the issue right now is that since it is going through New York, it's very much a New York issue. And I don't necessarily think that it's people don't want it going through their backyard. I think it's that they just don't want to have another like big infrastructure that could be a potential danger to them. And we did talk to a lot of our respondents and asked them about if they were involved in the DAPL and the Keystone Pipeline. And some of them said that they were inspired by it, had acted on it. And so it does show that there's a connect between other states, but this one is very much within New York and New Jersey.
Thank you.
Do you want to, at what point do we want to let Stephen get up and do his presentation?
Whenever you're ready.
Yeah, it's 8 o'clock, so maybe we should cut it off here, but you guys think they did a good job? What do you think? I couldn't have answered half those questions. You guys are a tough crowd. Seriously, those were some good answers. But what would you guys ask them to change or quickly do differently if you want to give them some feedback for a future presentation?
Make summary findings.
Okay, a slide of summary findings?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a really good piece of feedback. Yeah, go ahead.
A laser pointer so you can point to the map.
No, but I'm going to stand up there and do it. I'm going to be Vanna White. No, that's a good recommendation. Okay. We're good. Yeah, go ahead.
The other thing, environmental assessment is you have a proposed action, and you also required to look at alternatives to the action. So I think, if you don't have the pipeline, then what do you have?
But there's no EIS been proposed yet.
No, but that's the kind of thinking, you do have to look at what are the choices here too.
But we have no EIS, so we can't look at any documents, and the DEC denied all of our Freedom of Information Act requests. They wouldn't give us interviews, and they wouldn't give us documents.
But surely to get a permit to construct this, you're going to require an EIS by somebody.
It hasn't been proposed to the DEC yet. Yeah. But you're on the right track, it just hasn't happened yet. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Include the rationalization of why the pipeline is going on that route.
Oh, you mean like it's the straight route from Albany to the refinery?
It goes right through the high population corridor. There's other routes. Why that?
Okay.
It's so they can follow the thruway. Right, it's less expensive for them to go along the thruway versus taking other routes.
But why?
With the existing train track.
Shira has highways that they can go right along.
Yeah, we can look into that. See if there's a good answer.
And that's
One last recommendation, go ahead.
I really liked the combination of quotes and photographs from your notable participants. I thought that was really good.
All right, thanks again.
Thank you so much.
AJ,
Yeah.
I haven't even introduced myself to you. We talked on the phone.
Hey, it's pretty good fun to put up Facebook with me.
And Bill Benke I've talked to on the phone too, but we've never met in person. So as I say, by being late, I missed all the good stuff. And one thing, one thing, I'm going to give you some material that was compiled after the good work was done by the researchers, so that some of the data they were working with came from a time when the scene was quite different than it is now. So you need to understand that as we go through it. Now, how do I advance?
I'm just gonna, you just give me the high sign.
Yeah, next slide, please. The overarching theme in this, as any such talk, is climate change. This is one icon of climate change. You may see a polar bear off Norway. Next slide, please. As you know from the presentation, Pilgrim Transportation applied to pipeline 70 million barrels of Bakken crude per year out of Albany. They'll skip the train blow up, you know about that. Next slide. There's a picture of Loch Naggatic. Next slide, please. The proposal to pipeline 70 million barrels out of Albany raises an IAQ, that's an infrequently asked question. How would those 70 million barrels get to Albany? Next slide, please. 20 mule team? Hand carried? Peruvians? Truck? No. Next slide. This is the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, but no pipeline would work to get into Albany. It's just too far. Camel caravan? No. Next slide. Airborne tanker? Oh, now here's a real tanker. Oh, next. And a barge. This is a barge carrying crude oil going down the Hudson River. But it could not be used to bring crude oil into Albany. Next slide, please. The 70 million barrels would all come by rail. There's a big BNSF locomotive. Towing some nice, shiny-looking tank cars. Not the black, ugly ones that we call the Pepsi cans on wheels. Next slide, please. The company, the Pilgrim Pipeline Company, would not itself rail the barrels in. Its role would be to pipe them out. Next slide, please. I'll show you how the company plans the line, as they did a couple of years ago, and the drawbacks to it, many of which you've already heard in wonderful detail from the students. You're probably asking, why am I talking about the pipelines? But you know that. The subject here is regional transportation of oil, and pipelines is part of it. So we know that there's no pipeline proposed for Saratoga Springs itself. The impact is what would feed the pipeline. Next slide, please, HA. Skip that. We said that. Proposed pipeline would be fed by trains through Saratoga Springs, connecting with the pipeline in Albany. Oil trains and the crude pipeline would be together assisted to carry back the crude from North Dakota through New York State, from the west and from the north, and you've seen the maps from the researchers. Next slide, please. 4 main points tonight. First is the routing of the Pilgrim pipelines. Next slide, please. We've seen this already. This is too small, but from Albany down the thruway, pretty much jumping off around Suffern, coming over through New Jersey, bending around and making its way into Linden. About 170 miles of dual pipeline. Tonight we're only talking about the crude line. not the refined product.
Can you answer her question about
Oh,
why
yes.
they chose this route?
I'm sorry, good idea. I think, as the researchers said, it's basically because they saw the New York State Thruway as a wonderful, relatively cheap and accessible right-of-way that could be got. They know they want to use about 90 miles of it. And they don't have to deal with private property owners if they can get permission to use that. Bringing the oil in any other way would require building, if you want to know, that's really the best way, the only way. This is the proposed route of the north end coming out of, this is Albany, then we're going north there, this is Rensselaer over here, numerous terminals, the pipeline would jump across the river, go over here and cross under the river again and proceed its way down south. Next slide, please. The gathering system, my map is slightly different from AJ's. I show the lines both going in the United States territory until the Canadian Pacific line jumps over in Detroit. And, but basically, they converge in Albany, and then you can't see the dotted line running down to Linden. Next slide, please. So that's 3,600 miles of crude by rail to serve 170 miles of pipeline. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Next slide, please. Dangers of pipelines for a locality. So we're trying to say that for pipelines, is there a justification? So let's talk about risks, and then we'll talk about justifications. Spills from petroleum pipelines. This is both refined products and crude oil in the United States. Average median in the last few years was 55,000 barrels a year. Next slide, please. The pipeline would cross 257 streams and water bodies, 9 miles of wetlands into which there would be a chance of a leak. Next slide, please. There are some portraits of leaks. Refugio Beach, California. This was the Plains All-American pipeline. Just had another leak in Oklahoma. Their Buffalo line leaked last week, 19,000 gallons. This is the second biggest terrestrial leak in the United States near Belfield, North Dakota, of about 580,000 gallons into Ash Coulee Creek last December. Next slide, please. These are some causes of leaks. We talked about problems in the materials and next slide, please. Here's the Husky oil spill in Saskatchewan. The ground moved and broke the pipe. Next slide. Leak detection is not sensitive. Slow leaks may not trigger alarms. Sudden drops can be treated as false alarms. And as one of the researchers said, a majority, in fact, Bill McKibben said the best leak detector is a passerby. And sometimes smart pigs are touted by the company as electronic devices that travel inside the pipeline looking for dents and creases, but they can miss subtle trouble spots. Next slide, please. Another notorious spill of diluted bitumen in Mayflower, Arkansas. Next slide, please. And this is the biggest leak on the United States land territory, Tesoro pipeline in Tioga, North Dakota. They're still working on picking it up. You can see it looks like a quarry there. Next slide. That was picked up by a farmer who smelled something funny in his field. This is another notorious leak into a tributary of the Kalamazoo River, in which 1,500 miles away, the operators in Alberta detected something wrong, but they thought it was a false alarm, so they turned it off first, and then they turned it back on again. And it wasn't until somebody called in, hours and hours later, that there was oil spewing into the river. This one didn't need a leak detector. Someone was digging with a backhoe and hit a crude line. That's substantial, 600,000 gallons. Next slide, please. The risks might be outweighed by benefits because we know that nothing is risk-free. but there are really no appreciable benefits to New York society or even to world society from the Pilgrim Pipeline as it was designed. Continue, please. The business plan of the pipeline is built on a lie. Next slide, please. As the researchers said, the spokespersons for Pilgrim wanted to tell you that 200,000 barrels a day of crude traveled by barge from the Port of Albany to quote-unquote terminals and refineries in New Jersey. The figure is completely false. Next slide. Actually, only one refinery in New Jersey has ever had a significant amount of crude. That's by barge from Albany, the Phillips 66, called the Bayway. These deliveries ended more than a year ago. Next slide. This is a picture of the Bayway. Here's Staten Island. Here's the New Jersey Turnpike. This is the Bayway Refinery. And these are numerous other terminals connected to a large number of pipes that supply most of metropolitan New York and northern New Jersey. Next slide, please. Here's a crude oil barge going south off Saugerties Light. Next slide, please. Total waterborne crude in 2014 from Albany to all points was 94,000 barrels a day, less than half of the 200,000 that the company claimed was going to the particular refinery. Next slide, please. To the particular refinery at the peak of activity, 60,000 barrels a day. Next slide. The volume from Albany to the Bayway fell off steeply. 60,000, 14, 27,000 the next year, 4,000 average over the first half of 2016. And that was the end of it. Next. The 200,000 barrel figure, I think they just made up because they wanted something that would be what would travel through a fair-sized 20-inch pipeline. Next slide, please. We were never supposed to know that the actual volume of crude oil movement was much less from Albany to Linden. We were supposed to accept 200,000 as the going rate. The company wanted us to think that if 200,000 had been going there, as they used to say, year after year, that if you changed it, as the researcher said, I think it was, as Sarah said, put the oil in the pipeline instead of in the barge, that 200,000, it was still coming in by train. They wanted you to believe, but that was not true. Next slide, please. In addition, not all the oil shipped out of Albany went to Linden. 20,000 barrels a day went to other destinations, other terminals and refineries in Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. Another 14,000 barrels went in the tanker Aphrodite, which some of you may have heard of. Here's a picture, next slide. Here's Aphrodite on her last voyage. She came about every 2 weeks and created quite a bit of consternation, but never spilled a drop as far as anyone could tell. Okay. The main point we want to make is that the proposed crude pipeline would require at least as many bomb trains, we could call them crude oil unit trains, from the north into Albany as have ever been seen, and at least twice as many as obtained in the last quarter of 2015. Next slide, please. Pilgrim asserted 200,000. There's false evidence that the companies at the port, Buckeye and Global, had been working successfully with the railroads to bring into Albany and move out by water a daily average of 200,000 barrels. They never came anywhere near there. Next slide. We already saw these figures on total waterborne takeaways and how they dropped. Next slide, please, AJ. This is just the arithmetic that anything that came in by rail had to go out by water and vice versa. So I used a rough idea that a unit train is typically 105 tank cars. Nobody really knows what the number is. It varies around the country. But I made it that one unit train is about 1.3 unit trains a day to move 94,000 barrels. That was roughly at the peak. Next slide, please. Okay, Pilgrim never said that 200,000 was coming into the port, but they wanted you to believe it. They gave you all the evidence. Next slide. Here's a crude oil train going south, loaded. You can't tell it's loaded, you just see the picture. But if they're going south, I took this behind the Hudson Valley Mall in Kingston. Next slide. Here's an empty crude oil train playing the girl on the flying trapeze over the railroad trestle at Catskill. And you can imagine full trains go over this railroad trestle as well, and over a number of other trestles that look even scarier. Next slide, please. So to keep an outgoing 200,000 barrel pipeline full when you have 94,000 barrels a day coming in won't work. What to do? You have to bring in more. So that's the crux of what we're saying. If Pilgrim said they wanted to move 200,000 out, they weren't moving it in, so they'd have to bring in more. We can really cut to the chase that Albany, to move 200,000 barrels into the pipeline, Albany would have to bring about 2.8 bomb trains a day into the port. Next slide, please. Now, this is kind of interesting. Didn't we say 200,000 barrels to Linden is a fiction? It is. Then where would 200,000 barrels a day go if it were built? You tell me if it won't go. Nobody knows. Pilgrim has never presented any plan for what they would have done with those 200,000 barrels. The Bayway said they didn't want them. They can't be exported. They can't be moved sensibly to any other location. It's a pipeline to nowhere. Okay. All right, I don't think, I don't believe that export is at all practical. Let's see, next slide, please. I think the future looks dim for the Pilgrim pipeline. Tankers stopped in 2015. Barges to Linden stopped in 2016. The deliveries of crude by rail to Albany stopped last spring sometime. Yes, it's come to a complete end. Next slide, please. If Pilgrim had built their pipeline in 2016, and they actually, in their draft environmental impact statement, in their draft application to the New York State Thruway Authority, they said they wanted to be operating by the end of 2016. If they had achieved that, there'd be no oil in Albany to put into the pipeline. This is the drop-off in waterborne crude. Next slide, please. People have asked, I think, at the meeting, why the drop-off took place. It was basically because good quality light crude from West Africa and the North Sea and from Canada became available at a price that was actually lower than the price of Bakken crude when you added on what it costs, about $13.50 per barrel to rail oil from Bakken to Albany. So that's an enormous markup, and it made the places like the Bayway refinery and all the East Coast refineries bought their oil imported. They didn't need it to come from the Bakken. They couldn't afford it. Next slide, please. So I think the Pilgrim pipeline is not going to work, not going to succeed, but we do have to be aware that oil is a famously volatile business, and that this is why we wish to be sure that the Pilgrim pipeline is never built, because if it got built somehow and we're looking for 200,000 barrels a day to keep it busy, then there would be more interest in bringing them in. Next slide, please. Assume the worst. Okay, we will assume the worst, but we'll also be hopeful. Next slide, please. I think that really wraps it up. Everything else I have is more about what to do regarding Pilgrim Pipeline, and I think tonight the main goal was to gather some facts about the types of transportation. One last thing I want to say, though. One of the questions suggested that there's still some uncertainty or unclarity that there is no choice to be made between rail and pipeline as to getting oil, let's say, to Linden, New Jersey. Because oil has been going down the Hudson corridor by train, but it doesn't go to Linden, New Jersey. It goes to Philadelphia. And the Pilgrim Pipeline would not replace that train track. So there are very few locations in the United States or in the world where you could actually have a viable question. Should we do train or should we do pipeline? It's determined by geography, by the availability of train tracks, so across the Midwest, for instance, it'd be very difficult to pipe oil over the Rocky Mountains. So oil that goes from the back end to the West Coast goes by train. But oil can come down from the Great Plains down to the Gulf Coast. Some by train, but mostly by pipeline. Also, the researchers were posed the difficult question of which is better if you had to do something, barge or pipeline for moving oil. And I would say at this point, the question is completely moot because there isn't any oil coming in to be moved. And we really try to avoid ever making these comparisons. Secretly, not too secretly, barges spill a lot less than pipelines do per billion barrel miles of oil moved. But a spill on water is worse than a spill on land. So it's not easy to say one is better than the other. If I were absolutely pushed, I'd say barges are better, but we don't have to do either. We don't. It's a false alternative to say, well, the oil has to get there somewhere, get down to New Jersey. It doesn't. It doesn't have to come into Albany. It doesn't have to go to New Jersey. As far as most of us are concerned, it is best if it stayed in the ground and was pumped out more slowly later on as needed, rather than rushed out in an attempt to take profits as fast as possible. But that's enough of my politics. Thank you very much. Are there questions about what I had to say? Did we meet? Yes.
I guess it's more of a comment. It seems to me that with the decisions made at the National Administration to allow the Keystone Pipeline coming, that there's going to be an obvious route for the Bacon oil is going to be go by pipeline directly to the Gulf Coast refinery. So it seems to me that's even one more reason why it's unlikely that the train shipment east is going to be a particularly efficient way to Albany is going to be an eventuality. I think these new pipelines are going to obviate demand for this option.
I completely agree with that. Actually, the one that would move the back-end oil would be the DAPL. Keystone XL would probably move mostly dilbit, diluted bitumen from the oil sands formulations from Canada. But DAPL will move oil to the Gulf Coast. And from there, people talk about maybe bringing it to East Coast refiners like the Bayway or those on the Delaware River by ship. But that's not really it's cheaper for them to buy oil from Nigeria than it is to buy oil at the same price per barrel on the dock out of West Texas. Yes.
We had an opportunity to drive on Route 12 from Utica up to, it goes all the way to Watertown. And right about Boonville, I started seeing bomb trains today, and it is so, I'm always uncomfortable seeing them, and they're really close to the road, and I kept track, and it went from Boonville to Lyons Falls, which is 9 miles, and it was total bomb trains that whole way on the track. And are they just sitting there empty?
I wouldn't know. There is a crude oil route that goes up through past Watertown. It crosses into Canada at, I've forgotten the name of the little town. It's a CSX line, and we believe that some oil is moving across there and going to refineries in Canada. But 9 miles of cars, what you can do the next time if you have this horrible sign is hop out, see what the hazmat plaque says on the cars, write down the number, because oftentimes the cars are something other than crude oil cars. 1267 is the code number for crude oil.
Really? I saw the yellow, there were yellow.
Usually it's a white and red diamond.
Okay, I didn't see that.
With a code in it. And then you could run to your book, which you have in your car. This is what first responders have to do. If they hear there's a fire, they're supposed to figure out what's in those cars. And especially if they're clouded in smoke, it's quite difficult. Yes?
2 questions. Pilgrim Company, is that a privately held company? What's
Yes.
the official name of the?
Its official name is of the parent company is Pilgrim Holdings LLC.
Okay.
And the company that's applied in New York, I don't think this is called Pilgrim Transportation Incorporated of New York State. Thanks, AJ.
Is it publicly traded?
No.
Who's the CEO?
Mr. Williams, I think I forgot his first name. He's apparently worked for the Koch brothers in the past, and he was instrumental in this Plains All-American pipeline. He's a long-time pipeline builder.
And who owns it?
Well, who owns it? There's Ares Management is a hedge fund that has made some investments in it, but I don't know honestly who the titular owners are. I guess it would be Ares in a sense.
And New York State pension funds invest in Ares investments.
And
yes.
The other question was on changing over on the rail cars. I don't know if anybody knows along these lines. The old rail cars, I've heard, are really hard to dispose of, recycle. Does anybody have any information about any hopeful opportunities for those old cars?
Never thought of it. They'll have to have a. Remember when the mothball fleet was down off Croton 40 years ago? You could see old Liberty ships tied up there in the river. So maybe there'll be another one of those mile long, or they'll have to bury them in the ground. I don't know. It's a problem because those are ugly and they're dirty. Yes.
Like you, I came in late. I have to apologize for missing the good parts of the program. But the part that I did get, one of the take-home messages to me is the fact that we still, on a state and national level, don't have a comprehensive, well-thought-out, long-term game plan for energy like Jimmy Carter wanted to put together, 40, 45 years ago. We still don't have our act together. The other countries around the world are doing a much better job of this. Most economy because they want to close the nuclear plant near New York City on the Hudson. But the other plants upstate, they want to subsidize them and have the rest of us pay for them. I think the Germans have a better plan, just have a game plan to retire all of them. But anyway, could we comment on that, the need for a long-term comprehensive plan?
Well, I think New York has done better than many states, but we also have a long way to go. So the governor has set up goals for clean energy to come in and I forget the exact timetable, but all of you can follow this. The state is working on it, but much, much more to be done. Any other questions? Everybody knows everything. Good. Thank you all.